Welcome to the Stories of School Leadership podcast, the podcast where we elevate the voices of and create connections between inspirational leaders from the UK and around the world. I'm Emma Lurie, and thank you for joining me as I share these journeys, inspirations and stories of education, leadership and life. In this episode, I'm joined by Jonathon Nicholls, who is a former principal and former executive principal. And he has a background in engineering, which brings a really fascinating angle to lots of the things that we dig into in this week's podcast. So we talk about childhood and autonomy. We get into disrupting the curriculum. We talk a lot about leadership and those feelings of discomfort when we take on new challenges and how to manage those. We get into building teams, the impact that coaching can have. And Jonathon talks a real vulnerability around managing that balance as a leader alongside our personal lives as well. So it was a really fascinating chat. I hope you really enjoy it. Let's get into it. Hi, Jonathon. It's really fab to have you with me this morning. Can you just share with us who you are and where you're from?
Of course, yeah, very good to see you. So I am Jonathon Nicholls. I am a former executive head teacher. And over the recent months, I've been taking some time out to reflect on my career to date and decide on what steps I'm going to take next in the world of education.
Amazing. And so this will be a bit of like this is your life, because we can go through and do some more reflection. So it would be really lovely to know a little bit about your kind of school experience yourself, what that was like, and ultimately, I guess, how you then got into education as a career.
Great. Okay. So, yeah, my life really, I can almost split up into three chunks. So the school phase, the first phase of my education career, and then the next phase, and then I feel like I'm in the fourth phase, but it's yet to be decided what that is. So the first phase in education, I had what I think we would consider a traditional experience of school. So a primary school from in the usual ages, and then went to a secondary school and stayed in that school from year 7 right the way through to 18, and then went to university and felt very fortunate to be able to do that. Just a brief bit about those three blocks of education, if you like. So my primary school, I made some brilliant connections there. I absolutely loved it. I attended that school partly because my sister went there and she had been successful through that. My mum also worked there in a whole variety of different roles over a 20-year period, so it felt sensible to just go to that school because it was convenient. I made some, like I say, I made some wonderful connections. There was a real richness to the cohort of students that were in the school, and I feel on reflection that I learned an awful lot about people and families and some of the challenges that come with low socioeconomic areas. It's not to say that that was what the school was made up of, but I certainly picked some things up from there. But I loved it. I really enjoyed it. Made some great friends, and I lived in an area where grammar schools were prevalent. And typically, the children from the school that I attended as a primary age child did what everyone did at that time, which was to do the 11 plus to see whether or not you could get into one of the grammar schools or you would go to one of the comprehensive schools. And I managed to get the right score on the test and got in. I had the choice to go to a grammar school, and I chose to go to. There was 3 prominent ones. There was a boys one, a girls one, and then a mixed one. So I chose to go to the mixed one, and that again, I joined that at the start of year 7 and stayed there all the way through to the end of my 6th form. And I would say had an overall a really positive experience. Made again some great friends, connected with some people that I'd known all the way from childhood as well, which was great. And I particularly enjoyed the standout subject for me. Two really were sports. So I grew quite quick. I'm 6'3", so and I grew quite quickly to that height at about 14. So the basketball coach was like, "You're in. Even if you can't play basketball, you're in because you're tall." So I got really into basketball, football, athletics. I really enjoyed the sporting experiences, and the subject that really sort of captured my attention because of my interest in technology was designing technology. And we just had the most inspiring teacher who took the subject and took it down pathways that were just in the curriculum. And he gave to a couple of students, 2 in particular, me and one other, pretty much freedom in quite a dangerous workshop throughout our breaks and our lunch times to just go and play, within a safe environment. But we just had great fun creating and designing things, and that further fueled my interest in engineering and technology, which is what I then went on to study at university. So I spent 5 years at Oxford Brookes doing automotive engineering. I grew up loving anything to do with cars, four wheels, engines, and things that go around tracks very fast on a Sunday afternoon was what captured my attention probably from the age of 3. So it felt only right that I would go on and continue to study engineering in some format, but I chose automotive engineering because I loved cars and still do.
Amazing. And so I feel like there's a thread here. How did you get into education then? Because that sounds like a different route that you were heading on.
Yeah, so it's worth saying that throughout that experience, from the first moment in primary to the point at which I left the university at 23, because I spent 5 years at uni in the end, not once had I considered a career in education. And as I say, my love was for cars, everything that I was doing. So I actually started as a mechanic in a local, or trainee mechanic in a local garage at 14. So I was building up the qualifications that I needed to get into the world of motorsport and the practical experience to back that up. So everything was guided towards that. And when I came out of university, as much as I was still very interested in doing that, I felt like I could look at some other things. So I had this week in, I think it was the August that just after I'd finished the university, where I thought I'm just going to explore other things that I might be able to use engineering as a set of skills and experiences to apply to. And I had lots of conversations and interviews in the space of a week or so. And the last one was in a FE college in Hertfordshire. And it was for what was titled at the time as a lecturer in motor vehicle technology. And I thought, that sounds interesting. In my head, I was thinking I get to talk about cars all day. I know lots about those and I love talking about them to a group of students who I think are going to be really motivated. The starting salary was way better than anything that was being offered in engineering, and there was a golden hello. I was thinking that student loan paid off, and they were offering to pay for teaching qualifications. So I thought, I'll do that I'll go for it, and then maybe I could do that alongside continuing to do some part-time stuff in motorsport on the weekends, because that's typically when you go and race the cars. And so I went for the interview and got the job. And from not ever thinking about having a career in education, that was the first time I started a teaching role. So I became a full-time unqualified teacher of motor vehicle technology in an FE college. And here I am nearly 19 years later, still within the sector and wanting to carry on in it as well.
Amazing. And what was that first experience like? Was it what you expected? Was it you got to talk about cars all the time and the students are really engaged, or slightly different?
That's a really interesting question. So I don't think I had any expectations, because I didn't really truly understand college, because I'd only had these, although I lived in front of one for the best part, all of my secondary years of school. There was literally an FE college behind my house, and I never really kind of understood where they fitted in the education system, because I'd been through this primary grammar school, and like most grammar schools typically are encouraging you to go off to university. There was very little talk about doing vocational or technical learning. But as I started the role, what I realized was that quite a few of the students, in fact, lots of the students would come to the college and had quite often been told at some point in their earlier life, you're not academic, go and get a trade. So it wasn't out of the question that some of these students at the age of 16, when they joined the college, irrelevant of the level they started at, it could have been entry level 1 or level 3, their self-esteem was sometimes quite low, because they'd had this sort of message that, I don't fit the system, so I need to go and do something that's, and I like working with my hands or something like that. So I found that really interesting. And what I really enjoyed was, and I think I realized quite quickly, my job here isn't just to take this information and put it into their brains and hope that they get a job at the end of this at 18. My job here is to engage these students in what life is going to be like for them, is to increase their self-esteem through the way in which I deliver. And my job as a lecturer is far more than somebody that just delivers and imparts information. I am here as a coach, a mentor, and all these sorts of things. I can articulate that now. At the time, I just didn't know it, but it was so much more than just delivering, the stuff that's on the bit of paper that you get from the awarding body. And what I quickly realised as well, particularly in that first year, was the power of doing what my design and technology teacher did for us, which was, I've heard it described a few times as teaching on the edge. So you take what's there and then you do something with it. And sometimes it goes horribly wrong, and the students make fun of you for it going horribly wrong because they expect it to be right. But actually in that, there's this beauty of making mistakes and teaching students that, actually we need to give things a go and fail at them, and let's do it all together. And I did some really interesting project-based learning without knowing that it was called that, because I was still pretty fresh in the system, and realized that was a way of supplementing the curriculum in a way that would enhance their experience and give them that extra sort of boost in confidence that ultimately I think helped them perform better in the more sort of standard stuff that we had to get through. So yeah, that was I really enjoyed it, and it captured me probably within the first month of doing it. And when I reflect back on the number of hours I put in those first year or so, that to me was a measure of not just my interest in doing a good job, but that was an interest in doing a good job on behalf of the people that I was doing it for. And that hasn't changed.
I think you summed up that kind of role of an educator perfectly. Like there's so, the one little drop of, our roles is that imparting knowledge, and
Yeah.
the amount of other, and now more than ever, I think the amount of other is just, it's hard to even put it into words, but you summed it up really beautifully. And I was going to ask you whether that, that experience that you had with that specific teacher that you mentioned kind of, planted that seed for you, because when we're inspired, by other educators, lots of people will say, I remember this one teacher or this one lecturer who gave those opportunities in kind of teaching the next generation of teachers, I suppose. What was really interesting is you talked about that freedom and the opportunity to play. And I guess we might not use the word play when we're talking about, young adults in higher education, or I guess even probably in secondary school. It's not necessarily the language that I think is used very much. And even in primary schools, it's dumbed down and it's, they're just playing. So that the fact that a reflection that you have on that time in your life, or of what gave you so much value, was those opportunities to be free and to make choices and to play with what ultimately was a huge passion for you.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it's probably worth me just adding as well, that theme carried on, so certainly in the next block, so this FE phase, as I call it, of my career. And so I started off in this FE college that taught a whole range of different technologies and engineering subjects. So that some of the construction and electrical installation, we had lots of different things. And then I moved to another college now near where I live now, and they had more of a specialism in motorsport, which was the thing that I had a huge passion for as a hobby. And now I was able to bring that in line with delivering subjects, and that was another fuel to the flame for me. And again, there were just more opportunities to create this connectivity between, I know I've got a job to do to deliver some content here, but we're going to do this in a way that is going to blow these students' mind and give them opportunities that connects with the industry that they're about to go into, so that they understand what to expect. Because I think particularly when you're working with 16-year-olds and upwards, they are the closest ones in the system to work. I'm very mindful, and when I think back to this now, we spend so much time talking about preparing children for the world of work, but we shouldn't do that at the loss of allowing them to remain children. And the more I think about this now, the more I think we're talking so much about preparation for adult life, and yet we keep forgetting the fact that they're children. They deserve to enjoy that bit, because once it's gone, it's gone. And childhood should be something that they reflect back on ideally and say, actually, that was a wonderful time.
Because the freedoms that children should have are massive, aren't they?
Huge.
Sometimes you look back and go, oh, it's so much easier when even not necessarily children, but younger, didn't have all of those pressures. So and I also think, which you alluded to in that idea of freedom, is that that decision to give young people autonomy and choice
Yes.
over what they're doing. And I think what happens a lot is that we as adults believe that we know what they need, and we know, we need to be in control of everything that they learn and the steps that they take. And we so often remove the choices that they have and those freedoms. We don't give them the trust that actually they were born to learn. They
Absolutely.
have an innate ability to learn, and if we give them that trust and support them, for it's that idea of facilitating along the journey rather than controlling so much. I think that's a real issue in education at the moment, is that adults are in control of everything, and we then expect them to, bless them, nip out the other side of this long extended period of education and be independent learners and be motivated to do things, and they haven't experienced that very much.
No, and as lots of people are saying that are in the system and out of it, is that the system that we are using to prepare them for that period of adult life is quite old in its design, and requires some disruption and transformation in order to make it more relevant and better, and to better prepare children and young people for what's to come in the future. So anyway, that could be for a whole different podcast perhaps.
We could talk for hours about that. So what happened then to get you to from that sort of lecturing bit into executive leadership, because that's a big leap.
Absolutely. So just in that second college that I worked in, so in total I worked in 3 different FE colleges, one for the majority of that 9-year period. And I was in my 20s, very aspirational, wanted to keep moving forward. One, because it just felt like the right thing to do. 2, I was aspirational, and 3, and this has continued to be a driver, is trying to find a way in which I could broaden the influence beyond a singular group of students that I might be teaching in the classroom. So could that be a whole course? Could it be a department? Could it be the college? And typically one enables themselves to do that by moving into leadership or management positions, then leadership on the way through. And in FE, it's somewhat similar to the world of schools, but equally, I think it's just a different dynamic in the FE world. So I realized that I needed to move up into managerial positions, so started to gain some extra responsibilities in that second college that I worked in. Actually started to do some other work other than just delivering technical qualifications. So I became a teaching and learning mentor across the college. So I was working with teachers or lecturers, as they were called, in other departments. So hair and beauty and catering, possibly my favourite department. I've got a real sweet tooth, and they had a bakery, brilliant. So I loved observing their lessons, and they, would get some time to go and work with other teachers, and I found another thing that I really enjoyed, which was, teaching's great. I really enjoy it, and I found some ways of trying, being good at it. People were telling me that I was quite good at it. I was getting good feedback from the students. The results were great. All the typical things we look for, but it frustrated me that other people weren't experiencing that. So I really enjoyed going along and finding other people and going, okay, look, it's not quite working. How can we do this? And I think it was in that experience that I started to realise that it might be worth me considering taking responsibility for a team of people, trying to improve the quality of teaching and learning through modelling best practice or coaching in some sort of way. But I didn't really know what that was at the time. It was just it was the job, and I just took it. So that started to light some sparks. But I would say in the sort of last 2 years that I spent in FE, I'd kind of written off ever working in a school, because I just thought, people from colleges don't go and work in schools. I don't ever hear about anyone doing it. And certainly all the people I was working with were like, people don't do that. It's, you work in FE and this is the thing, or you work in a school. I'm like, oh, okay. But I listen to people, and I listen to them carefully, but I'll always go and do my own research and be curious. So I went and did some, I'm like, oh, okay, yeah, it does seem quite challenging, because the PGCE for a school teacher is different to that from an FE, which is the one I had. So I started looking about, couldn't quite find anything that I thought was the right fit. And then I realised that, I came to realise that the university technical college movement was starting to gather some pace. So they're called UTCs in short. There's 47, 48 of them across the country now. When I first started looking, there was 5, maybe 6. So they were very new at that time. And they immediately jumped out at me. I thought, this is brilliant. This looks like a hybrid between the top end of secondary and an FE college and working with employer partners. That's where I need to go. Where are they? Right, none of them are near home. That's annoying. But I found one that was relatively close, about an hour away, that was opening up the following September when I started looking at it. And I applied for the assistant principal role as it was, and got offered the job before it opened, the school, but I turned it down because I was the commute is quite big. It's about an hour and 10 minutes each way. My son was really young at the time. My wife was working in the city, and I just thought something about this doesn't feel quite right. So I said no. So that was almost the start of my school career. But so I did another year actually in the college environment, and during that year, the founding principal of that school phoned me up once the school had opened and said, "Look, the guy that took the job when you said no doesn't want to carry on in the role and is going to go elsewhere. We'd interviewed you, and you would, how about now?" And I said, "Well, that's now you've got a school building. I'll come and have a look." And I looked around it and thought, actually, now is quite a good time. Let's go for it. So that September, I started as assistant principal, and that's the point at which I started this next, the third phase, if you like, as I was describing earlier on, of working in a school environment, but a unique school environment relative to the rest of the secondary phase, because we recruited students at 14 and 16 and didn't have Key Stage 3. So that was a really exciting step. Brand new school. I'd never thought I'd be doing something in the school that was only a year old. Joined as an assistant principal, and this next 9-year block essentially was broken up into 4 roles. So I did 2 years as assistant principal, 9 months as vice principal, then became principal. Did that for 5.5 years, including the pandemic period, and then I did a year as executive principal at the end before I stopped in September 23.
Wow, what a journey. And I guess not least the pandemic, but I'm imagining that, that step into leadership is always challenging. But what are some of the other challenges that you face in terms of kind of that leadership, learning about leadership, stepping into a slightly different kind of setting, I guess, for you? And working your way up. What were some of the things that were tricky?
Yeah. So I think if I just go back to the first role as the assistant principal, the first challenge was the transition from a style of education and a format that I'd become, quite accustomed to and used to, with dealing with post-16 students and adult. And although I had lots of experience of working with huge national and international employers through FE, I was now doing the same type of relationship, or working on relationships with employers, but now in a different environment and in a new school system that frankly not many people had heard of. So that was quite an interesting shift. Then also on top of that I'm now an assistant principal. I was an assistant head of department in the role prior to that in the college, and they're quite so. As an example, as an assistant head of department, I had a team of, so there were 50 staff in the engineering department that I was in. I probably line managed, I don't know, between 5 and 10 people, and would teach about 6 hours a week. When I joined the school, I was doing many more hours teaching because we were quite a small team. It was in effect a startup, so everyone was all hands on deck, and that was brilliant. Everyone was really, really into it and getting the school going. But it was just a different way of working. But I had to try and adapt and understand, so that it had qualifications that I understood, so BTECs and other technical qualifications. But now I was trying to understand the GCSE program, different accountability measures, A-levels and their accountability measures. I was working with school teachers who had different experiences in schools that they taught in comparison to college teachers, lecturers that I'd worked with in the past. So huge amount of adaptation required in that first year, but I loved it. I loved the challenge of like, oh, this is different, but underpinning all this is about building a great experience for children and young people that come to this school, getting the narrative right for this new school so that people in the local area understand what it is that we offer, why we're offering it, and the methodologies that we're using, because it is different and there's nothing else in the area like it. So that should be appealing, hopefully. And and then this other bit of like, this is brand, like being in this startup mode was, like just like you're experiencing now with this sort of new phase of work. It's, you just have to put in huge amounts of energy. So that was a big challenge there. And I think as I progressed through, and particularly thinking about leading and managing people, I think expectations rise when you take on a leadership position like an assistant vice principal, etc. Though as I moved up, you become more exposed. As a result, I think the expectations increase significantly. You're more accountable. That can play havoc in your head as a person, let alone leader. And certainly at various points in that, probably most so when I got the principal job. People talk about imposter syndrome. I don't sit comfortably with that as a phrase, but I did feel a massive amount of discomfort. I felt like I wasn't, and I know this is what people describe as imposter syndrome. I didn't feel like I quite belonged in that role, despite the fact I'd sat in a room, people had interviewed me and said, "It's you. Can you start Monday?" And that was on the Friday before, and it was all quite a quick experience. But despite all of that, and despite the belief that other people had in me, I reckon it took probably 18 months of quite hard internal work in partnership with a coach who I could talk about in great depth, to really get underneath why I was feeling all these different things, and actually what impact that was having on my ability to lead myself and the people around me, and the consequence of all of that on the performance of the school as well. So yeah, huge amount of challenge, notwithstanding the fact that one bit of that included trying to manage a school through a global pandemic, which that wasn't on the job description.
No. and yet that, did they?
No, it didn't. And yet like so many other school leaders and the people working in any part of the world, in any industry, we just had to get on with it and work out what to do. But in our case, as school leaders, we had to work out how to get on with it on behalf of children and families. And I think as a team, when I reflect back on that, we really rose to the challenge and did some really quite innovative work that enabled us to create a good sense of stability for our community, which I look back on with real, it's difficult, but it was a really positive experience on the whole to have had the chance to lead a school in such a difficult time. I don't see that as a negative. I see that as an opportunity that I think certainly I took as a great period of growth.
Yeah, and I guess it's an element of, if you're trying to build up that confidence, lack of imposter syndrome, whatever we want to call it, going through those sorts of challenges give you that reflection to say, well, I did that. So let's be honest, if you can lead a school or organization through something as challenging, never seen before, pandemic, then you can pretty much do anything. Surely that gives, that build of confidence. And when you were talking about, some of those challenges, and particularly you mentioned your coach, I was going to ask, who or what inspired you in your leadership and when things were difficult to help you to keep going?
Yeah, I mean, it's a really deep question, isn't it? And again, could be reserved for an entire podcast on its own. You can't achieve it. You can't be a great leader without great people around you. That is just a fact. It can feel, particularly as a head, it can feel so isolated, which is why it's really important to surround yourself with people that are going to pick you up when you're having those moments of self-doubt, that are going to help teach and guide you and mentor and coach you through those. And that can come in lots of different forms. So it doesn't have to be in the form of employing a coach. Sometimes it can be the people that you're just I say just in your team, but are your team. So if I reflect back on that particular period, I appointed because of all of the people in the senior team before I became principal, they're all brilliant leaders, and all were promoted to more senior positions all at the same time. So I was then required to create a brand new senior team. And when I reflect back in that period, I didn't know it at the time because we were still quite fresh. But when I think about that 5.5 year period of being a principal, that senior team, so my deputy and the assistant heads were just an amazing support. We created this sort of just this really tight-knit group of people that at times felt like there was, there was no hierarchy or anything. It was just a group of people doing their best to run the school, and in particular, some quite challenging times with the pandemic. So that was massive, and I think that comes down to great recruitment, and then the way in which you create the culture within a leadership team, which is not easy, and it does require some discomfort through that process. But when you get the right people around the table, when you create the right culture, you can just do incredible things. And so that was a good starting point. The founding principal of the school that I joined after that period of FE, I think it's fair to say she saw something in me that I didn't see in myself, and gave me the opportunity to become an assistant principal in that first instance, and then continue to support me right the way through from AP right the way up to executive principal, and continues to be the CEO of the trust that we became. So that's I'm truly grateful for that support, because you need somebody that's gives you those opportunities at the very least. Whether they're the right, it's just having those opportunities are massive. So to have been given those, I'm truly grateful for. And then I'll talk about the coaching experience as well. So I had done the MPQH when I was in the vice principal role. I did it in quite a short period of time, less than a year, I think. Was on the verge of having this opportunity to become a principal, but felt like the MPQH, although it gave me tools that I felt would be useful for a headship type role, I wasn't yet convinced that I had the inner skills to be able to deal with it. And I don't think the MPQH addresses that enough. It's not to say the MPQH is bad. I think it's a great course, but I felt like I was missing something. And I started exploring, I've heard about business leaders having coaches. Sports people obviously have lots of coaches, and they help people get better at what they do in various ways. So I started researching, found an old connection that I had in my FE days. She had come out of the business that she'd been working in and started a coaching business. And unknowingly at the time, I became client one for her, what is now a really big education coaching business. And I started working really extensively with her with her as a coach, me in my senior leadership position, and it was transformative to the point at which I would say life-changing. Not because it didn't just affect my ability and the qualities and the behaviours that I had as a senior leader. It affected and continues to affect, because of what I continually work through in my head from what I've learned. It affects me in everyday life, my family, my relationships with my wife and my children, and friends, etc. And how I approach life has been altered through that experience. So, and not easy, right? Because you have to go pretty deep, and sometimes there's a Pandora's box that you didn't even know existed that you have to open, and that can be quite painful at times when you pull things out from how you might have thought about things in childhood and other things that might have affected you on life's journey. But a great coach, as mine was at the time and continues to be for not just me, but for so many other school leaders, has helped me through that. And I believe that enabled me to be a better head on behalf of the children in the school, but also helped me work with the adults in the building to try and get the best out of them. I mean, it sounds glorious. It didn't always work. Some people didn't agree with what I did. There weren't, it wasn't all just high fives and whooping and cheering all the time. There were definitely some really difficult moments and some tears shed, but that's part of leadership and part of working with people. And but if I was, if someone came to me and said, what do you think is absolutely imperative to have in place for all new or aspiring or new heads, or even people that have been in it for a while, I would say somebody alongside them, a coach, some supervision, whatever it might be that's there to support them, because they're going to need it. And it's a lonely job. Even though you're surrounded by people in the job, it's a really lonely job. And sometimes there are things that you just can't talk to people about, and you need that.
Yeah, and I think what you've described there, I guess, is that layering of support network, because absolutely, a really strong team within the organisation or school that you are in, that's vital. But also, especially when you're at that headship kind of or exec level, there are things you are unable to share with them, or that it's not helpful to share. And so having somebody external, I think, making sure that you've got a broad range of support. You know, it cannot
Mm.
just be one person's job, and having somebody external that you can, no judgment, you know, share
Yeah,
how tough things are, I think is so valuable. And coaching is certainly becoming more popular, and rightly so, for leaders. I think we've got a long way to go, probably, for all, everyone in the sector would value and do extremely well having that sort of support.
I agree. Yeah,
Yes,
I think that's a
finding
really
time
important
for it,
point.
isn't it?
I think it's finding time, but also prioritizing it and saying, you know, one of the questions I often think about is how different might I be as a leader, as a person today, had I started that coaching program earlier on in my career? And that often makes me think, well, why aren't we doing it for more people when they're entering the system, at whatever level it might be? But, you know, particularly for new teachers and new educators that are coming into different phases of education, like I said, you can't do any of this alone. We're not going through life alone. So why should we go through leadership and our progression there? And, you know, great sports people become better at sports because they've got an amazing team of coaches. Every school, Matt, whatever, should have a team of them, in my view. And you know, that might mean that we've got more people that are thinking about staying in the system rather than leaving it. More people that are able to cope and manage with the pressures and stresses of not just the leadership role, but the things that are going on outside. Because so often, and it was certainly my case, is that whilst I was dealing with the challenges of school leadership and everything that comes with that, I wasn't without challenges outside of my role in leadership as a father as well. So that and but in part because I've got a child with special educational needs. So that all of that plays a part. We just, you know, it's life, isn't it? And it's all intertwined. And so often we talk about, you know, coaching leaders, but we're coaching people, and those people happen to be doing the job of a leader, and also might be my case, a dad and a husband, whatever else they've got going on, and that's life. And a great coach, I think, can help you with all of that tapestry together, to help you excel in all of those parts of life, rather than just being a great coach for being ahead, because that's all well and good, but if you as a result of that leaving your friends, your family, your children, whatever behind them, I'm not sure that's what we need.
No, there's a lot of complexities, aren't there, in that?
Yes.
You're right, in that role. And to be, you know, the healthiest leaders, we need to, I guess, consider all of those elements.
Yeah.
One of the things that struck me when you were talking, and it links to kind of what you're doing now, was that a kind of curiosity and that interest in you kind of asking those questions about, well, why are we not doing it like that? And I know you know, where you are currently, you talked about being in a space where you're exploring your options and taking some time. And one of the things that you do that I love is your LinkedIn what if questions. Okay, talk to us a little bit about, yeah, kind of the space you find yourself in now, and yeah, what you're doing with that time to be curious and find out.
Yeah. As I said earlier, I left the executive principal role at the end of the academic year last year, so 23. That was predominantly driven by the need my son needed some really quite specific support because he'd become really unwell over the course of last year, as had my dad, who sadly passed away. So just lots of really challenging moments outside of school leadership that needed time, and I created a situation where I could take some time out because I felt that was the only thing I could do to support my family best, because they come first. So did that with a mind that I'd probably take some time out entirely from anything other than just being, you know, dad and husband between September and Christmas. And as my son started to get better during that period of time, I was able to do a bit more exploratory work about connecting with people, and started doing a few bits of consultancy work, which I quite enjoyed. It was predominantly research and writing content, and actually working with my coach to help her with some of the features of her business. So that's all been really interesting. But one thing that I have come to realise, and I think it was when one of my what if questions was, when you're in the leadership roles, like a head teacher or any of the others, frankly, or just working in education, maybe just work, it's really difficult to have a broad view of things. And yet, as leaders, we're often told, you know, you need to take time out to come and take a helicopter view. So frankly, as a head teacher, it's really hard. It's not impossible, but it's really hard because of the pull and the draw of all the different responsibilities and accountability you've had. And I think that's, for me, on reflection, is the thing that I have appreciated the most about being able to take a bit of time out. Is I don't know who said it. I certainly know my coach shared it with me at some point, was that sometimes you've got to take your nose off of the canvas to see the beauty of the picture in front of you. And I wasn't doing that in the leadership role. I was so in it, and you just miss things because you're quite blinkered. So by coming out, I've been able to see that, oh, there's a whole different world of education outside of the one that I've been working in that's really quite different and innovative. And there are people that are trying to solve some of these huge problems. And I just didn't know they were there because I was just too busy in my own head. So this has given me time to explore that, create connections with people, which, if anybody's not sure how to do that, get on LinkedIn. It's what it's designed for. And be really, I say brave, just get on and, connect with people and send them messages. And some of them will respond and some of them won't. And the ones that respond, create a connection, create some conversations, things happen. It's brilliant. I don't work for LinkedIn, by the way, just to be clear, but it's a great, it's a great platform for anybody in professional life, or anyone, frankly, but certainly in the world of teaching and education, it's great. But in reviewing that, I found people that are doing different styles of education. So I've been really struck by the online education community. I think there's some really exciting, innovative things going on there. In the process of last year, with the challenges that we had with my son, we chose to take him out and home educating him. So I've been connecting with the home education community, some of whom are deeply frustrated by the education system, and as a result took their child out for those reasons. And it's been really interesting for me, as somebody having been in it, to listen to their points of view and go, oh, that's really interesting. I hadn't even registered in my head that might be an issue for family. So I feel like I'm building up a much richer picture of what's going on in society for families that are bringing children up and trying to find the best way of educating them in the UK and further afield. And that I've really enjoyed. But it's all being driven by, like you said, curiosity. So why are we doing things like this? And the engineer in me says, if it doesn't work, why don't we seek a solution for it? Why are we spending time doing the same thing and then it breaks again? That's not, it's not sensible, right? It's create, and when things start to break, and then they cause some quite catastrophic outcomes, which is what we're seeing in education, then we really should be paying attention to that and doing something about it and seeking alternative solutions. And I think the key word there is alternatives. So often we do the same thing and expect a different result in education, and that's why I think these online schools, some of the alternative provision is often seen as the thing that you do when you get permanently excluded from schools. But actually, the word alternative just means different. So there's lots of people doing different things, and I found great connections there. And in asking these questions once a week, every Wednesday at 6 o'clock, anybody that's not connected, look at my profile, you'll find one on there. Interestingly, I've been asking them since the first week of January, every Wednesday, not missed one yet. And the most popular, the most engaged question was, I think it was the first one I asked, which was, what if every school had a chief happiness officer? And it was engaging because some people were like, well, you can't force happiness on children and all the rest of it. But it's quite interesting that everybody had something to say about happiness. But when I post things about some of the more kind of everyday things, like this week's one was about, why didn't we ban isolation and isolation booths in schools? There's a really, and what it's doing is creating a really interesting dialogue between people. And selfishly, what I'm gaining is a huge range of perspectives from a different audience, which when I was in the school doing my leadership job, I wasn't doing that. I was in the zone. And that's what I feel really grateful for, is having the chance to do that. And that all of that is helping me to think about what to do next.
And I really love those questions. And you're right, we don't create the time and the space to step back and see what's going on for us in our school setting, organisation, but we also don't necessarily then have that time to look around at what else is going on. It's just not prioritised enough in the culture of what the education sector is now. And there are, like I said, there are some great organisations doing things. There are some schools and some trusts who do create that time and that space, but it's not common practice, is it? And
No.
you know, there are other countries, for example, that really promote that. I remember being at a conference once and met a head with his wife who had been given 6 months. He was from Australia, and he had been given 6 months to travel and see other educational, you know, settings and organizations across the world. And he'd been in Europe, and he'd been, you know, 4 or 5 different spaces that he'd visited. And that was really highly regarded when you've done a certain amount of years in leadership, that this is, you know, an opportunity. And people have talked about, you know, having sabbaticals and even what, you know, what you're doing now, and for lots of different reasons. But I even think choosing to take a step away or a step sideways, or, you know, not just carry on in leadership roles, it's, you know, I've found certainly it hasn't always been seen as the most positive. You know, it's like, oh, why didn't you just stay in doing it? You've needed to make a different decision. And yeah, what you learn when you're out. I remember somebody said to me, but when I was panicking about, oh my gosh, what on earth am I going to do? And they said, you don't know what's out there until you get out there. And that has been
100%.
a real quote I keep coming back to when opportunities come up, or new learning around things like you said that I had no idea were even out there, that would have really added to my leadership. But I didn't make it a priority, or I wasn't able to. I
Yeah.
think there's a bit of both there. And I guess the question is, how do we do that? How do we step forward to a place where our leaders and our educators are given that space and that time, given that trust? I mean, I can think of several things that would need removing, you know, could be removed in order to create that space. But, you know, there's certainly a much brighter space ahead, isn't it? It's just how we get there.
Yeah, I think that's not an easy thing, because it's, you know, we're at a time where, you know, pressure on head teachers, school leaders, college leaders is really quite significant. The challenges are massive, and the world is in a really challenging place as well for various reasons. So, you know, I can't say what life was like as a head teacher before maybe 25 years ago, but I get the sense that this is a really difficult time for and it's quite different to how head teacher and leadership roles were in schools 20, 30 years ago. But I also think in the midst of challenge, and I think we saw this really quite clearly during the pandemic, is in the midst of this challenging time, there is an opportunity for more innovation than we've ever seen in the system. We need, I love the analogy that, again, I can't remember who did it, but there's this sort of analogy of, you know, people traveling down the river and we're rescuing them at the end. And I made reference to that sort of catastrophic point that so the engineer in me looks at that and goes, well, somewhere up the river, there's a bridge that's broken. And it might be that we need to do some repair work on that bridge in order to get the bridge back working again so that people can cross it and they stop falling in. But it might be that we also need some other bridges or other methods of crossing the river that's not just a bridge. And I think that for me is what keeps me going in education and thinking about continuing a career in education. Is it's not complete, and no one will ever complete it. It's never going to be the perfect fit, because we're trying to prepare these children and young people for a life that we don't yet know exists and what it's going to look like. But I think we've got to do a better job of being more adaptable and flexible with what we've got. And in order to do that, we've got to be quite brave and transformative in the approaches that we take. And that might involve some really difficult moments as well. And people don't like discomfort and difficult moments, but if we're prepared to go there, I think the rewards will be rich, not necessarily for us, but for the children that are in it now and the ones that are going to come into it, and then the consequence of that for their future lives and the sort of world that they're going to grow up in. And I think that's, I feel, and I know lots of people will align with this, I feel a huge sense of responsibility to find my place on that river. Am I a bridge fixer? Am I a bridge developer, a new form of crossing person? Or am I going to be somewhere down the river helping people come out the river and going, it's all right, you just walk back up and we'll find you the bridge again and we'll get you there, which and I think frankly we need all of it. I just haven't yet worked out where I fit on that towpath.
I think that's such a valuable point to think about, isn't it? And what you've already brought to the sector is incredible. You know, the amount of time you have dedicated to, you know, doing things in a different way and supporting young people is really great. I'm very excited to see what happens next. And I think there's green shoots, aren't there? There are green shoots of organisations, and, you know, and even in the last couple of years, but like you say, we're seeing more alternatives become available. And just by that, you know, families and young people are seeing that it doesn't have to be one way, and that is the start of it. The tides are changing. I have not full confidence, but I can see the green shoots.
I agree. Yeah.
Jonathon, it's been so lovely to spend some time with you. Thank you so much for sharing your journey and talking about, you know, what's inspired you. And I love your engineering analogies. I think they're really perfect for education. I can see bridges and quotes coming up. I'll be creating them so that we can share, and we'll share, you know, links to maybe, you know, the coach that you work with and the work that she continues to do. And I'll certainly be sharing your what if questions, because I find them really interesting. So thank you so much for your time.
Amazing. Thank you for your time too, and great questions as well. It's been a wonderful conversation. Thank you.
Thank you so much for listening to the Stories of School Leadership podcast. We'd love to know what inspired you in this episode, so do get in touch and tell us your thoughts. And please share this with friends and colleagues. If you have time, a review would mean so much. It really helps us to reach more people. If you'd like to connect with me to follow my journey or access some support, maybe supervision, coaching, or early years consultancy, you can find me at Stories of School Leadership on Instagram. I'm Emma Lurie on LinkedIn, or my website is emmalurie.co.uk. I hope you have a great day, whatever you're getting up to next, and I can't wait to share the next episode with you.